Hey everybody, welcome to the Book Leads Impactful Books for Life and Leadership. I'm your series host and leadership performance coach, John Jaramillo. This podcast series is about getting to the books that have impacted the lives of the people in my network. So these are great leads that I'll be interviewing, having a conversation with to get to those great books that have impacted their lives, their work, their leadership, left an indelible mark on who they are, whether they've written it or they've read a different book. And this series covers three categories of books. The first category where they're sharing with me a book I haven't read. A second category where we're both covering a book that we've both read specifically for the episode or we read in our past lives before the series even launched. The third category is where I get to speak to the author and or publisher to get the voice of the book, to get the face of the book out there, to learn a little background about what that author or publisher is trying to get out there to the masses. And my guest today is Zachary Green. And Zachary is someone who truly embodies the warrior spirit on and off the battlefield. He's a U.S. Marine veteran, former firefighter, and serial entrepreneur who grew a company from the trunk of his car to over $30 million in revenue. He's also an international bestselling author, a sought-after leadership coach, and a speaker who has testified before Congress and was selected by the White House to represent the U.S. as a delegate at the Global Entrepreneurship Conference. But beyond his impressive credentials, Zachary is a lifelong student of leadership with a deep passion for books, history, and the timeless lessons we can learn from the great leaders and battles of the past. His book, Warrior Entrepreneur, Lessons from the Battlefield to the Boardroom, explores the warrior mindset and how resilience, adaptability, and strategic thinking shape success. Through his company, Warrior Enterprises, Zachary has taken this passion a step further, leading corporate teams, military units, and government agencies through immersive leadership experiences on historic battlefields. Zachary, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you so much, John. It's a real honor to be on your show. I'm a big fan.
I appreciate that. So, having read the bio, which just provides a quick glimpse into who you are, what does that work look like today, Zachary? Who are you today? Just to kind of get an idea for the day-to-day work that you do in those different areas that you're touching now at this point in your career.
So I talk a lot about the hero's journey, or like I like to call it the warrior's journey. And the warrior's journey goes all the way back to Homer and the Iliad and even the Bible and the old Greek and Roman stories. If you ever watch Star Wars or Godfather or Harry Potter, you can follow it. It starts with this young adventurer that craves something different. They want something more than what's out there. They realize they're different. They meet that mentor. The mentor tells them about what life's like on the other side of the realm. They cross that threshold. You know, for Harry Potter, it was platform 9 3/4 where he crossed from the Muggle world into the Wizarding world. For me, as a Marine, it's standing on the yellow footprints at O Dark 30 and going through those infamous silver hatches that all Marines go through, but no Marine's allowed to come out of those. From there, you then struggle and you really go through battling the dragons and the difficulty, and that's where you earn your rhino skin. That's when iron sharpens iron. And then at some point in time, it's just overwhelming and you crash, and that's where you find your crucible and you encounter the abyss for the first time. And the only way to get through that abyss is to transform and change, and that's what happens with the warrior. They realize that whatever got them to where they are is not enough, and the only way to make that monumental change is to shed your former self and transform into this warrior, which thrives off of the adventure and the challenge. From that point, they start to lead other warriors, and eventually get to the point where they are leading so many different warriors, but then they have to make that transition to leave that warrior realm and go back to the home realm. And when they go back to the home realm, they miss the brotherhood, they miss the other warriors, but most of all, they miss that purpose. And then they need to, not want to, they need to find that next mentor, that young, or that mentee, that young adventurer that's looking for that, so that circle can cross over. Well, that's a very long answer to your short question. I'm now in that point where I've left behind that warrior realm, being both an entrepreneur, a firefighter, and a Marine, and my passion now is to be a mentor to that next generation and try to coach them as they all start to embark on their journey.
So what does that look like on the ground? What kind of services do you offer clients? What are the different areas in which you encapsulate that mindset of where you are now in your life?
So, my company, and we can get into this later, how I started this company out of the trunk of my car and built it into literally a $30 million multinational empire. Brutal pathway. I'm still going through some of the challenges with it right now. But that was my warrior realm. I obviously at first in the Marine Corps and in the fire service, but my real warrior realm was entrepreneurship. I got to a point about 3 or 4 years ago where the business was doing well enough. Our family was in a good position that we decided we were going to leave our home of Cincinnati that we never thought we would leave and move down to our vacation home in Hilton Head Island, South Carolina, right on the beach, right in this beautiful area. And we did that about 3-4 years ago, and it's been life-changing. It's been wonderful, but there's something really missing, and that's what caused me to write the book. And the book was supposed to be about me, but as I start working with my publisher, he explained, look, unless your name's Oprah Winfrey or Prince Harry, nobody cares about your biography. They want to know what's the story. You can weave your story into the story, but when I went back and he's like, what was it that really made your life what it is? And it was struggle. It was, being raised by divorced parents. It was having the challenges of ADHD and dyslexia and going to 6 different schools growing up. It was going through the Marine Corps. It was doing all that stuff. That's what really made me who I am. And so I started to research, what are these other warriors out there? For example, the samurai, one of the most incredible warriors of all time, because they spent more time on serenity than they did on just brute strength. They did poetry, they did calligraphy. Then you look at the Spartans, which are the exact opposite. They literally killed the weak children that weren't able to get out there. They took them away from their parents and they had to fight every day just to survive. Then I look at other cultures like the Navy SEALs or the British SAS or the CIA or the FBI, which I have chapters on all those things and just what the lessons to learn there. But then also comparing it to entrepreneurs and what were the things that entrepreneurs weren't. Things like Elon Musk. People don't realize Elon Musk failed in his first 3 or 4 businesses. It wasn't until he finally got things right. Walt Disney got fired from his job as a cartoonist in New York City, and when he was depressed and going home on the train, he saw someone draw a picture of a little mouse, and that was Mickey Mouse. It was amazing. So these stories just started to come out, and it just was incredible, the similarities that they all had with each other.
Okay. So is it right now, are you just focusing on the book, or are you still coaching? Are you still speaking?
Yeah, so my main passion and focus right now is public speaking. So my leadership keynote speech is really about leadership is timeless. Leadership never changes, only people and technology do. And everyone's trying to chase the latest and greatest new Covey or Zig Ziglar or Tony Robbins. It's every 2 or 3 months there's a new set of books out there. And my thing is, look, they're all the same. It all goes back to that core leadership of courage, integrity, motivation. The leadership skills that Alexander the Great exhibited are the same leadership skills that you exhibit in your business. And what I like to do is use storytelling, tell you the story about this incredible battle, pull out and dissect those leadership qualities that were needed, and then show them how you can apply them in your real world business today.
Yeah, I've always gotten so many questions about the number of leadership books that I have. Why do you have so many? Don't they all say the same thing? And it's like, yeah, there really aren't, at this point, there really aren't groundbreaking ideas in leadership for the most part, right? There's research here and there, new research that presents new ideas, new models. But essentially the idea of leadership, the ideas, the pillars of leadership are the same. Most authors, they just have, like you said, the storytelling that's very important. So it's about that author, their experiences, their work, the words they use, their tone, the urgency. So like you said, those lessons are never going to change. You kind of see them rehashed. But every once in a while, there is a new author that provides it in such a way, in certain words, paints a certain picture that does make it interesting. So I like the fact that you're saying these are ageless, timeless lessons that have always been around.
It's the tools and the technology is what's changed. The leadership core values haven't changed. Imagine if we had digital mapping systems during Normandy where we could interface and see in real time where they were with the. Imagine if Hannibal had the ability to have real time communication with his, fellow Carthaginians when he was asking for help at the Battle of Zama over in Italy. What a difference that would have made. It took months for them to get that information back and forth. That's the tools and technology that changed, but those core leadership principles have never changed.
Yeah. So Zachary, can you walk me through what it is that led you here? How did you end up here? Usually I ask people to start right around the time they either leave school or go into the workforce, because I want to get a sense of who the person is that's sharing the book with us. So, your journeys, all my guests, their journeys lead up to who they are now, lead up to what they're sharing about the book that we're covering. So can you give me a walkthrough? What did it look like from that point to now for you?
Well, if we kind of go through that hero's journey, that warrior's journey, it really did follow that almost to a T. Grew up in Cincinnati, very loving parents, but I had a lot of challenges growing up. ADHD, which is funny, they call that a disability when you're in school. It's called multitasking when you get out of school. And then all of a sudden I was like, oh, he's an energetic multitasker. He can do all this stuff at once, right? But when you're trying to
I chuckle only because my son has ADHD. So any kind of lessons I can take away from somebody who's functioned a great life or lived a great life, I'm always curious how people utilize tools or what lessons they've learned from that. So that's the only reason I kind of chuckle when you mention that.
Well, it's all perspective. If your perspective is sitting at a table for 8 hours a day, having a teacher feed you information, yes, it's going to be a challenge. But when you get to do your own thing in college and choose which classes you want to go to, and then in business where I can have so much stuff. I mean, I'll tell you, the most zen moment in my life is sitting in the right front seat as the officer of a fire truck, getting my 80 pounds of gear on, my helmet, my earphones, going 60 miles per hour down a 30-mile-per-hour road, lights and sirens. You can see the smoke header off in the distance, and 3 different radio channels. I am so zen at that point in time. Most people, they'd be like,
Yeah,
it's almost like
yeah.
our wires are crossed. They're different, right?
Yeah.
So,
but it's interesting what you mentioned about the 8 hours in front of a teacher, because even before when he was in his younger grades, he's going into 5th now. Even in the younger grades where you're not really doing a curriculum, but you're kind of building towards reading and writing and whatnot. So he still had kind of like his personality. But then as they get closer to more reading and there's more metrics and there's more standards, standards are great, but you see his little mind that's curious and energetic about everything kind of in defense mode because he has to keep up in certain ways in school. So it's amazing to think, once he does get into an environment where he can pick what he wants to do, that laser focus that you say is just, it's reined in. It's amazing to see once he hits his stride and what he wants to cover.
But that was the early pathway, and for him too, of building that rhino skin, that iron sharpens iron, being told by teachers, you're not good enough, you're not smart enough, you're not going to do this, you're not going to do that. I went to 8 different schools, from Montessori schools to private schools to public schools to learning disability schools. Ended up at a Catholic high school as a Jewish kid of all places. And that was the one that really turned my life around, because they gave me both the discipline and the compassion. They allowed me to kind of start to feel myself out, but within a very strong structure, and a structure that showed the importance of community service and having a higher power that's out there.
Okay.
Really changed my life. So at that point in time, I knew I was ready to join the Marine Corps. It had been a lifelong dream. I went to a bunch of the different recruiting stations to try to sweeten the deal up. Went to the Air Force recruiter, and they told me how easy it was going to be, and nice air conditioning, good chow. I went to Army. They told me about all the bonuses and how big they were and how I could do any job I wanted. Went to the Navy recruiter, and they started telling me about all the adventures I could go on, sailing the 7 seas. And I remember I walked in the Marine Corps recruiter, and I always knew I was going to be a Marine. It was a foregone conclusion, but I just wanted to see what the other ones said. And I remember walking up to him and saying, hey, the Army offered me this, the Navy offered me that. What's the Marine Corps got to offer me? And you could tell I upset him because he kicked his legs up on the table and he kind of did one of these things with his hands and he sighed and he goes, "Son, let me tell you something. We've been the finest fighting force for the last 225 years and will continue to be the finest fighting force. My question to you is, why would you want to join the Marine Corps? Why would we want you to join the Marine Corps?" And so I was thrown off. I was like, wow. And so then he looks me up and down and he's like, "Look, I've seen your kind before." He's like, "There's no way you're going to be able to make it through Paris Island. There's no way you're going to make it through infantry school. You're just not tough enough." And I could hear all those voices from all those other teachers and coaches and people said, "You're not strong enough. You're not hard enough." I grabbed that contract right out of his hand, signed it, and before you know it, I'm down at Paris Island, South Carolina. Now, he's a very good recruiter because he knew the best way for a kid like me is to dare me to do something, right? And it was brutal. For me, I think it was harder for me going through Paris Island in the summer than for most people because I'm a mama's boy. My mom laid my clothes out for me on the end of my bed my senior year of high school. I never cooked a meal for myself. I never did laundry. Every time I got in trouble at school, my mom was the one that would show up and take me and put me in another school or reward me when I got suspended because nobody took or did that to her baby or whatever. And as much as I still love my mom, we talk on a regular basis, I realized that probably wasn't a good opportunity for me to grow. And what I couldn't get over is the diversity in the Marines is amazing. We had kids from the literally inner cities projects of Philadelphia. We had kids from West Virginia with dirt floors. We had kids from all over the place. Some of them were just there so they could get a nice meal and a place to sleep. I was there because I had something to prove. I wanted to be a Marine. I wanted to show. And those that had the real struggles before they got down there, they did pretty well. But by about the second or third week, I knew I was in real trouble. I was struggling, couldn't sleep, was really feeling sorry for myself, realizing, we're all varsity athletes when you get down there. I was a varsity athlete. I did pretty good in a couple sports, but when you're compared to everybody else, I really wasn't as good as I thought I was. And my crucible happened. My final moment happened. I remember it vividly. We were doing what's called drill, where you march and you march and you march. And it has to be done in absolute perfection. You got 70 guys that immediately turn left at the exact time. Their right foot hits the floor at the exact right time. And you hear the rifles go from one shoulder to the other shoulder with just one pop. And they call column left. Of course, I turn to the right. We have one of the drill instructors. There's like 7 drill instructors per platoon. One of them is called the heavy, and that's what their job is, what it sounds like. Their job is just to put out discipline. So the heavy pulls me aside. He gets me down on the parade deck, and he starts doing what's called IT, incentive training, which is basically push-ups, sit-ups, side straddle stops, all this stuff. And you're at the point where you just can't breathe, you can't move. And I remember him leaning over and saying, "Why are you down here, Green? Why are you trying to mess my Marine Corps up?" He goes, your mama's not here to help you." And when he said that, I collapsed. I fell down on the ground. I went into the prenatal position, ugly tears, just crying, white foam coming out of my mouth. And I remember looking back and seeing him. I could just see his back as he walked away. And it was the loneliest, most horrible moment of my entire life. I still get upset talking about this. Inside of that space in front of me, I saw literally a black hole start to open up and me fall into this abyss. And I remember the philosopher Nietzsche said, when you're faced with the abyss, the longer you stared at the abyss, the more the abyss will stare back at you. And what that means is when you're in those bad situations, if you're in a bad relationship, if you're abusing drugs or alcohol, if you're going through whatever, the longer you're in it, the harder it is to get out. And really what that means is you're in a hole and you've got to get out of there as quickly as possible, because the longer you're there, the harder it's going to be able to get out. And that hole in front of me was despair, was being spoiled, was thinking I'm better than everybody else. And when you find yourself in that rock bottom, there's a real clarity there, because all the noise is gone, everything's gone. It's just you in that darkness. And I always say it's when you find yourself at that rock bottom, the rock bottom is a beautiful place to build your new castle, because it's the rock bottom. There's nowhere else to go.
That's a great place. That's a great way to put it. I've thought about, being at the bottom, and it's the most honest place you're going to be. There's no lying to yourself. There's no catering to your feeling. Like, you are zero, ground
Raw.
zero. But just the way you put it, where that's where you can build your castle, is just incredible.
Yeah, and so then what happens is you've got to honor the abyss. You've got to honor everything that got you there, because that dad that walked out when you were 7 years old, that mom that was abusing alcohol when you were trying to get fed and take care of your brothers and sisters, all those people that you need to appreciate them and love them, because they are the ones that gave you that rhino skin to get you through that abyss. And when you can start to look at that as appreciation and gratitude rather than something to be embarrassed about, that's when the warrior really starts to unlock. And that's what happened to me. I was possessed from that point on. I joined my platoon. I said, I'm going to be the best Marine ever walk the earth. I did exceptionally well in rifle and physical fitness and everything else. The following summer, I went to officer candidate school, graduated number one in my platoon at officer candidate school, which is one of the most difficult programs out there. And then I decided, I didn't want to stay in the Marine Corps anymore. It was just a bad time. It was during the Clinton years. There were a lot of downsizing, so I got out as a corporal, didn't get my commission. And then September 11th happened, and I felt really guilty. I wanted to do something more. I wanted to get back in the fight. And so I became a volunteer firefighter. And as a volunteer firefighter, I was, got 80 pounds of gear on your back, a big heavy helmet, these big gloves that ruin your dexterity. And as I'm pushing my way down this dark hallway to try to find the seat of the fire, I realized, oh my gosh, I'm not in the hallway anymore. I'm in a closet. And I couldn't find my way out. I looked down at my regulator and I realized, oh my gosh, I've only got about 15 minutes of air left before I'm dead. And obviously found my way out, talking to my captain. He starts making fun of me and saying, Zach, it's just what happens to everyone. You got to get used to it. I'm thinking like, no, that's not just something to get used to. It's a primal fear of the dark. It's not like a learned fear, like the boogeyman or something like that. So anyway, I start thinking about what can I do to solve this problem. Now, my full-time job was at Eli Lilly. I was in brand development and marketing, working on billion-dollar drugs like Prozac and Cymbalta and Cialis and all these other ones. And we never went in there and just said, hey, take this pill because it's got this, this, and this in it. No, you say, here's the problem with diabetes. Here's what happens if you don't treat diabetes. If you take this medication, we're going to fix all those problems. Problem, solution. I put that same mindset on with this gear, and I said, okay, problem. When you're in the dark, you get disoriented. You lose accountability of each other and your tools. You get lost. The solution is if we can provide a visible light source that's visible in the dark, not something with batteries, because batteries and light bulbs fail. You need it most. Murphy's Law works very, very well in both the infantry and the fire service. But this glow-in-the-dark material that we were using before when I was in the infantry on the back of our helmets so we could see each other. And I thought, what if I could apply that technology to firefighters? And I came up with a couple prototypes. I go into a fire. Next thing you know, everyone's trying to pull my helmet off of my head. I get outside. Guys are throwing $20 bills at me. Made $5,000 in about 6 months. My fire chief sat me down and said, look, you've got something that's going to revolutionize the fire service. Stop treating it as a hobby and get serious. And I remembered a quote from one of my favorite leaders of all time, Teddy Roosevelt. He said, when you're faced with a monumental decision, the best thing to do is the right thing. The next best thing to do is the wrong thing. But the worst thing to do is to do nothing. And I walked into my office at my corporate job. I quit. I maxed out my credit cards, got a booth at a trade show. Within 3 days at the trade show, we had booked $100,000 in sales. The problem was I had no money left. I had no manufacturing capability. I had no way to process these orders. Guys are telling me, hey, man, you got to take a knee. You got to start refunding orders. And I just thought back to what I learned in the Marine Corps and that I can get through anything. That the Marines and warriors always accomplish the mission or they'll die trying. And that's exactly what I did over the next couple of years. It was brutal. Almost went bankrupt, been sued, mental, physical, spiritual challenges that would crush a mere mortal. But I dodged foreclosure, dodged bankruptcy, but I ended up getting to about a $30 million company. And it was through all those dark times that allowed me to go back to that bad space that I was in the Marine Corps and realize, okay, here's how I got to get through it. Because sitting in that hole was not going to help me. I had to get up and realize, okay, can I negotiate with the people that I owe money to? Can I, negotiate or settle with the freaking blood-sucking attorney just to get this deal over with so I could focus on other stuff? And that's really what got me to sit here in front of you. And now I've kind of got the battle scars to show it, and wrote the book literally and figuratively. And my goal now is to teach people how to hone and honor that warrior spirit.
Zachary, when you talk about your corporate career, when you left the military, how did you end up in that environment, in that industry? What was the story leading there?
So right when I got out of school, I realized I just want to make a lot of money. Didn't really care what I'd do, but I knew I wanted to go into sales. And someone said, look, if you can get into life insurance and stockbroking early on, it's straight commission. It's called dialing for dollars. It's the hardest work there is. If you can just do that for a year or two, you can do anything. So that's exactly what I went after. One of the hardest jobs out of that. Did very well. Made a lot of money. Worked my way up. But I found one of my clients was selling business software, a company called SAP. And I'm like, wow, that sounds interesting. The kid's 27 years old, making about $350,000 a year. And I'm like, I don't even know how to spell SAP, but if you can make that kind of money, I'm interested. And I couldn't get a job directly with them. I had to take a couple other smaller software jobs, bounced around in that industry during the Y2K time. Eventually did get in with SAP, did pretty well with them. And then I met my wife, and she was in med school. And we got to meet a lot of drug reps that were whining and dining her and me just by the fact that I was with her, her fiance, boyfriend, whatever. And I was like, wow, these guys really like their job, but more important, they really like each other. Some of the friendliest people, good people, smart people. In the software industry, you're sharks. You don't want to put two sharks in the same tank. I never got along with any of my guys. And if I call someone up and say, hey, John, I need some help on this deal, when the deal's over, you're like, hey, man, where's my 2%? I'm like, what are you talking about? You're like, no, I helped you. You got to give me that. It doesn't work that way in the farm.
Yeah.
And then the other thing is I just fell in love with the biology and the medicine and the stuff that we were doing. My first job was in osteoporosis, and just the fascinating. I mean, who could think of anything more boring than a bone? But a bone is fascinating. It's a living organism. It replaces itself every 7 years. There's all these different biological functions that happen that cause bone to grow and to repair itself. And I loved it. And I also had something in common with my wife that we could talk about too. So that was fun. So did that, looking back, I should have probably stayed there because I was making good money. It was easy job. But my life since I left, there's been no easy. It's either been the greatest highs of the world or the lowest lows of the world. I tell people, they say, what's entrepreneurship like? I said, a warm bath feels great. Everyone loves a nice warm bath, right? But if half the bath water is freezing cold and the other half is boiling, scaling hot, it's not enjoyable. And that's really what the last 15 years has been like, is being in a tub that should be warm, but instead my feet are freezing and my upper body's getting
scalded. Zachary, so can you speak to, you kind of already painted the picture of, like you said yourself, mama's boy, right? But I'm always curious how somebody reconciles where they are now with who they were as a kid, because I think most people today that I speak to in leadership, when they get to that point where they're fulfilled, it's because they've kind of brought themselves forward. When they go into a career, when they go into a job description, they let so much of themselves go to appease their employer or the job description, whatever it may be. They forget what was important to them or who they were as a dreamer, as somebody who was looking for wonder in the world, whatever it may be. So for you, how do you reconcile who you are today to the kid you were when you were younger?
So it's funny, my mom is a big influence, but I think even bigger influence was her mom, my grandmother, and arguably one of the nicest, friendliest, typical grandmothers you'd ever meet in the world. All she did her whole life revolved around taking care of people. She never drove. Because she had to make sure that every day my grandfather came home, she had a fresh baked pie for him and do whatever. So that's kind of where it started. My mom got that. My mom's a performer. She's a professional ballerina. So she's used to making people feel good, making them happy. She's got that nurturing to take care of us. And so the one thing I've always learned from my mother, and still to this day, and I still talk to her several times a week, is she almost finishes every call, hey, just make sure everyone that you meet today smiles. Make sure you're making everyone happy. I think her idea of making happiness for me was so obsessed with having a kid and the love that happiness probably was a little too much happiness and a little too much good, and not a chance to get to that tough love and other thing. And again, that's what she learned from her mom. So it's kind of that combination of appreciation for that. At the end of the day, I wouldn't have changed it any way possible. Yeah. I had to walk that journey, like the little bird coming out of the necks. Some birds throw the little babies out of the necks and they just splat on the ground. And other ones, they do it in a way that they're good. And then some of them, it just takes a long time for them to get out, but they all eventually get out of the nest.
So for you, having grown up like that with a mom that was like that and a grandmother, right? It was all about feeling good, doing for others, and then going into the Marines and then the hardship of saleship. How do you balance those two then? Can you speak to that a bit?
You got to find joy and comfort and humor in everything. So for me, humor was a good way of dealing with that. Unfortunately, the drill instructors don't like humor. So like anytime something really bad would happen, I'd always bust out laughing and it doesn't happen anymore, but we got the shit kicked out of each other back then. And I had a ruptured kidney from getting punched. I got my nose broken by getting hit because things would happen and I just go, and I just start cracking up. And, they were trying to get through that. So I'm always trying to be the goofy guy, the center of attention, the one that's trying to organize the fun outing or the group or something like that. And, I don't know if that's from my parents or from whatever, but no one's going to take my joy away from me.
What do you consider your superpower? I
would definitely say my disability is my superpower, which is attention deficit disorder, hyperactivity disorder. The fact that I can do 5 things at once, and I can do those better than most people can do the one thing. I think also back to what we were talking about before, that joy and that happiness. I really enjoy meeting people. I enjoy being around people. I enjoy having parties and hosting people. And I think as a result, people do things for me that they maybe wouldn't do for somebody else.
Can you tell me just a little bit about your journey with ADHD? When did that turn for you? When did you start seeing it as a tool, as maybe an advantage, as a superpower? When did you start making that connection?
I think probably my time in the military is where it really started to come about, because you're in really frenetic, dynamic environments, and some of the kids would just kind of get crushed by all that activity. I remember us doing nighttime operations. You've got machine gun flanking fire. You've got flares going up above you. You've got smoke. You've got simulated artillery explosions. And some people just froze. You had to work through a combat course where you had to crawl under concertina wire, and some kids just froze. I thought it was fantastic. Like, I was like, man, this is like going to a concert. Like, I got all the stuff happening here. If anything, I was smiling too much. So I think that was when I realized, hey, there's something wrong with me. Not necessarily a bad wrong, but I shouldn't say something wrong. Something different about me, and realizing that. Then when I got on the fire service again, a very dynamic environment, especially when you're the officer of the fire truck. You're monitoring radio traffic from the dispatch. You're monitoring radio traffic from the rest of the firefighters inside the truck. You're monitoring radio traffic from the incident commander on the scene. You're trying to set up your strategy. You've got to figure out, what tools am I going to come off the truck with? What am I going to do? What's this thing look like? And then all of a sudden you find a body in front of you, and you've got Okay, well, that would distract most people because there's a body there, and you think, oh, I got to pick up and pull this body out. But no, that's the worst thing you can do, because if I put the hose down and pick up the body at the front door, now everybody else is dead and the house is burning down. I know that the team behind me is the rescue team. I step over the body, they pull the, and again, this has happened multiple times. Your natural instinct is like, hey, there's a poor old lady there. She's still choking. I can just grab her and pull her out. But no, you can't do that. That's the type of thing that if I couldn't stay focused and have all those different sensory stuff going on, because when you see something that horrific, you have to focus on that and nothing else. And I couldn't just do that. I had to do that. Now I radioed, hey, we've got a victim on the A side building at the so-and-so. I could do that. But, you know, those are just some simple examples of where those things could come into play.
What about in the world of sales? I mean, I can imagine how that plays out, but where did you notice that playing in your favor in that field?
Did you ever see that movie, a miniseries called The Queen's Gambit?
Yep.
And she, like, at nighttime, she would lay and see the chessboard up in the sky and be able. That's exactly what I did. So I look at sales as like a chessboard. You have a decision maker, and the decision maker is guarded by all the other, pawns, because no one wants to get to the decision maker. And then you have the blocker, a pawn, and that's maybe the secretary, and her job is to keep you away from the decision maker. And then you have this queen, and the queen can go anywhere, and that's maybe a champion. You develop a champion. And then you have a spy. The spy is telling you, hey, there's a hole over here between the strategy they've got. You might want to go in through, accounting, because they can help you out. And you start to look at it in all these, because when you're selling $1 million packages, it's a strategic sell. There's multiple different players that are out there. A lot of the people you deal with have the ability to say no, but none of them have the ability to say yes. And so when you're selling to get to not a no is very different than when you're selling to get to a yes. And how do you do that? So for me, I can really glance through a room, see 10 people, pick up certain clues about their mannerisms and the way they carry themselves, what notes they're taking, even what kind of phone they have. Do they have an old flip phone versus a brand new iPhone? Do they have a piece of paper? That's all giving me little bits of data that I'm putting into my mind to then determine where do they fit within that chess space. And then that's when the fun happens. Then I get to start playing chess and starting to use all those pieces against each other and for each other. Because at the end of the day, it's a game. Their job is to keep the money away from me, and my job is to take it from them.
That's incredible that you could visualize it that way, and just breaking it down for us, how you see different components, different players, obviously applying it to the chessboard from the Queen's Gambit. So I appreciate that. And then the last question before we jump into your book, Zachary, what does leadership mean to you? Obviously, a life of leadership, a life of service. What does leadership mean to you? What does great leadership look like to you?
So I'm going to start by telling you what leadership is not before I get into what leadership is.
Please.
Leadership is not management. And a lot of people mess that up. Management is doing things right. Leadership is doing the right things. Management is a title. Management is saying, hey, point A, point B, point C, you didn't do this, you didn't do that, you didn't. Leadership is inspiring people. So when I think of what leadership is, it's intangibles. It's getting somebody to follow you when all those other instincts in their mind say that's probably not the right thing to do, but I trust this guy. I believe in this guy. It's that thing. And you can have leadership at any point in an organization, and you don't have to be the CEO. You've got Betty in payroll that's been there for 30 years, could be the biggest leader in the company, because she knows exactly. When the CEO was an intern working for her, she knew what kind of candy that he liked and this type of stuff. So I'm not a big fan of giving a real clean, pretty definition of leadership. It's more of a feeling. It's more of, are you inspiring others? And I will tell you, within leadership, there are multiple different levels, but the top level of leadership that really I feel you can't be a true leader until you develop other leaders. That's when you really made it to that next level. Leaving that legacy behind, being the mentor, and developing that next force leader, because then your leadership becomes multi-generational.
Yeah. No, thank you for pointing that out. The difference between leading in this moment and actually making sure that when you step away, you've developed them. I think a lot of people forget about that aspect of leadership, the paying it forward. I think they just think maybe task to task, project to project. year to year without really thinking about the ripple effect that they have on the people that they've developed. So I appreciate that. Now, Zachary, jumping into your book, why don't you, if you could, introduce the book title? I'd mentioned it before, but we might as well mention it again, and how it came to be. When was it that you thought about writing a book? Just how you came to publish the book?
Sure. So it's called Warrior Entrepreneur: Lessons from the Battlefield to the Boardroom. And the book is kind of divided into two sections, almost three. So the first section is just the science of adversity. We really peel back the layers of the onion to the sympathetic and parasympathetic system. What happens when you freeze or you flight? I used to think it was either freeze or flight. No, there's actually like 5 of them. It's freeze, it's flight, it's negotiate, it's fawn, it's surrender. There's all these different things that are out there. And what causes you to do that? So the example I give to everybody is, if you've ever been in a car accident. Have you been in a car accident before?
Oh, yeah.
So what happens is your body releases endorphins and all these chemicals and adrenaline.
Yeah.
And the first thing that happens is it slows down really, really slow. A lot of people say they almost feel like it's slow motion watching that car. Now, that's if you saw the impact. If you got hit from behind, that's a whole different story. And the reason that happens, it's your body saying something traumatic is going to happen. It's a good chance I'm going to die, and we're going to create superpower. Your hearing, you probably remember the smell of the airbag. You remember the feel of the fabric of the clothes that you were wearing, because your body's gotten super, super sensitive to that stuff. You can train that. You can learn how to train that as a warrior. So someone that plays basketball and they're shooting free throws and they get in the, quote, the zone. No matter who's in the background waving and noisy and stuff like that, they can be in there. That's how they're training it. So as a warrior, putting yourself into those difficult situations, recognizing, are you going to flight? Are you going to fight? How are you going to deal with it? Recognize the importance of breath and oxygenation to be able to allow your brain to think better. What's happening to the blood flow in your body? Your blood flow is changing and shooting into your vital organs, and that's why you get lightheaded, because it's being pulled out in other areas. So I start to break that down and really get into the science, and then from there I look at, okay, there's a couple different traits that the leaders have. Tenacity, grit, creativity, serenity is a big one. And then I give examples of it, trying to tie into how you use those scientific methods. So, for example, some of the stories are just a quick paragraph here or there about grit and tenacity. My grit tenacity story is one of my favorite. It was the first ever female to get an infantry contract in the Marine, and she was born in a Russian Siberian prison. Now, you don't get any more grit than being born to a criminal in Russia, in Siberia, into a prison, getting adopted, getting beat up growing up because she couldn't speak English, and then finally becoming a female Marine infantryman. Amazing story. Another story about, just overcoming not just adversity, but creativity. A dear buddy of mine worked at the White House and got put on assignment to the State Department, and literally in the middle of the night gets a call from President Bush, says, I need you to lead a presidential mission to South Sudan. There's getting ready to be a civil war. And this kid at like 22 years old encountered every possible scenario you can imagine of trying to get over there. Finally gets there, stops the civil war. The president, it was actually the president had gotten killed in a helicopter crash. And the South Sudan was blaming the North Sudan. The Christians and the Muslims were getting ready to fight. And Bush was so big on trying to pull that peace together, and she recognized him at the funeral. So when you look at the fact that he had to get 4 different airplanes and they wouldn't let them land in Africa, I mean, just a fascinating story. Then I get into some really dark stuff, things that didn't work out. So, for example, we talked about Kate Spade, arguably a phenomenal, brilliant entrepreneur, but she wasn't taking care of her mental health. She wasn't getting the help that she needed. We talk about the importance of sleep. That is probably the number one problem that most entrepreneurs have, is they lose sleep. And when you lose sleep, then it really causes a bunch of other issues that come out from there. So again, the book's, I'd say, take some time, read the first 30, 40 pages, and then from that point on, it's just a bunch of short stories. It's a great thing to I tell people it's a great bathroom read because there's some good 15, 20-minute stories there, or on the train or on the airplane or something like that. And you can read it cover to cover also.
One thing that, I mean, so many things stand out in what you just shared, Zachary, but one thing that stands out was how you spoke about serenity. You were listing a bunch of different attributes, and that's not one that I immediately thought of that you would be listing, but you did. Can you speak to that? I mean, it sounds like it ties into the mental health and just taking care of yourself, but what is serenity? What does that mean for you?
So the strongest thing we possess as warriors is the muscle between our ears, is our brain, right? And if you're a fan of UFC, I love watching UFC. I always,
Same.
If I'm going to bet money, I always bet on the calmest fighter. The guy that's up there talking trash, doing whatever. Yeah, he may win a couple times. Conor may win a couple times. But when Conor finally went up against Nurmagomedov or whatever his name was, that guy never lost his cool.
No,
he never yelled.
No.
He never did anything. And he picked Conor apart like it was nobody's business. That's that serenity. You look at Bruce Lee. You go back, you look at the Shaolin monks and those other type of ones where you don't get all worked up. You even go back to some of the other stories like the Steven Seagals and the Jean-Claude Van Dammes and the, those things, Chuck Norris. They never go blue and stuff. They're just calm and collected. And you think about that with entrepreneurs. There's some entrepreneurs in the room that they just yell a lot. And if you're yelling, that's a sign that you're losing control because you're not doing that. So having that, I started to get into transcendental meditation. I was in a really, really dark place with the stress of my business. Oh my God, did it change my life. Just to be able to have 21 minutes of stillness, so still that I would forget to breathe during my sessions because I was so relaxed. All of a sudden I'd go like that because the calmness that brought on.
Your body didn't know what the hell was going on.
Right. And you look at, I think, the ultimate of all warriors of all time were again, the Bushido, the samurai. Yeah. And the fact that they focused on calligraphy, they focused on the art of the tea ceremony. It wasn't just for serenity. It was to expand their mind, to get them thinking about things in different ways.
Yeah, I've heard that conversation, a conversation about warriors, about fighting, how training in the martial arts can calm your mind, that you're not as impulsive. Can you speak to that just in terms of confidence, where confidence plays into all of that? To me, it's almost like if you're confident that you can protect yourself, if you're confident that you're thinking a few steps ahead, if you're confident that you're always present and just curious about everything around you, you're not as impulsive. A fight's not going to break out easily because, I don't know, once you have that confidence, it's like no one can take it away from you. And I think a lot of our impulsivity comes from everything you've talked about, fight or flight. That fear that something's going to happen. But in training, in specialists, even in the military, years of training hopefully calms your mind because you know that you're prepared. Can you speak to that just as somebody who follows martial arts, as somebody who's been in the military, as somebody who's been a firefighter? Can you speak to that connection between preparation, lending itself to confidence, which allows you to perform without jumping the gun, without any impulsivity? Can you speak to that a bit?
Unfortunately, we have some real kryptonite out there that's making it almost impossible to do that. And it's this thing right here. Okay? There's studies that are shown. So when you and I were younger and we went to a restaurant, they handed out crayons, right? So we could color. There's no crayons in any restaurants anymore now. Because the kids, even at 6 months old, 9 months old, they have their iPad. They're playing that stuff. Their brains are being not just permanently altered, but they're not knowing anything else. That those formations of those neurons and the way the neuroplasticity works now has to have that stimulation, that oxytocin that gets released when you buy something on Amazon. And by the way, I'm as guilty as anyone. I am highly addicted to my iPhone. I get anxiety if I don't have it.
Yeah.
What can we do in this world? So you hear terms like digital detox, those other type of areas. But at the end of the day, you got to find what works best for you. And stress is a very good thing. Stress will help you fight when I say fight, not just literally fighting, but like fighting for what's important, but it also has a downside too. The key here is balance. So if you've got someone with high levels of stress, and it's the whole concept, work hard, play hard. Like for me, I love doing adventure sports, whitewater rafting, bungee jumping, jumping out of airplanes, that stuff, because my level like this is so high and my balance has got to be there. This is not very applicable to everybody. I'd say only 10, maybe 15% of the population does this even make sense to. Most people are perfectly okay waking up in the morning, going into work at 9 o'clock, leaving at 5 o'clock, working in the cubicles, working on the factory, and that's fine. We need that. That is the backbone of our country.
Absolutely.
That is key. But if you want to have abundance, and if you want to drive the Ferrari, and you want to be able to go to stay at the club level at the Ritz-Carlton in Hawaii or Bali or something like that, you can't have a ceiling. You have to be able to be. But the problem is when you lose your ceiling, you also have to be willing to lose your floor. What that means is, yes, I've had years where I've made close to 7 figures, and I've had years, all within the last couple of years, where I've made literally negative amounts of money, like lived off of credit card debt. It's the ups and the downs. You've got somebody that works in a cubicle, they'll never make less than $50,000 a year, but no matter how good the company does, no matter how good the bonuses are, they're going to never make more than $70,000 a year. But if that person wants to make $300,000 or $400,000 a year and get into senior management, well, when you get up to senior management, those people get fired rather quickly. They don't have it. So there's one of those things to think about. So if you want to go down that warrior pathway where you're willing to give up, and you got to have the courage, first of all, to give up the floor. You have to have that drive and that ambition to do what most people never would, so you can live like most people never could. By doing these certain things, by making sacrifices, by betting on certain things, by not knowing what's going to happen with your money and this, that, and the other. And if you're willing to do that and you're willing to be part of that warrior journey, you need some other things in there to help balance out that stress, where the mere mortal, the normal person, if you will, who knows what normal is, they may not need all that stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, just in talking to everybody on this series, networking, friends, all these different conversations, you get a sense for that idea that you're speaking about is the needs that people have. That some people are fine going to the 9 to 5 for the paycheck. Others have that itch for more. So it's incredible how different we are. Zachary, for you in writing this book, how have you changed? How have you evolved? How did the lessons, the way that you saw the lessons, how did that change? I'm always curious with the authors I have a conversation with. You may go in and you know all the material that you're putting in there. You're familiar with it. You've lived it. And I believe 100% that you believe in it. But even when you put it down on the page, even when you share those stories and see the aggregate, all of it together, put it out there, how has it changed you? How do you view what you've written about differently, if at all?
I don't think I was really changed much by the words that I put in the book and the stories, because that's something I've always been there and kind of felt that way. It was just finally nice to have it on paper. But what did change me significantly and really blew me away was the editorial process and the way that the book is assembled and put together. So I write the book, I read it, and it sucked. I'm not going to lie. It was not good. So then I sit down with my publisher, and they're like, look, you got a lot of good stuff here, but we're going to do this. So she's like, what's the most significant, important thing that happened in the book? I'm like, well, on page 60, I died of COVID. She's like, what? What do you mean? I'm like, yeah, I was one of the early people to get COVID. There was no vaccine. There was no treatment. I went to ICU, and I stopped breathing and flatlined, basically. She's like, fantastic. Start with that as the first page of the book.
Fantastic.
So the first page when you open it up is, I can't breathe. I can hear them screaming, Zach. The ventilator is no longer filling my lungs with air, and I feel myself going down to the abyss. And you're just like, what the hell am I reading? And I do that for like 2 pages, and then I stop. And then I go into my business. And now the whole time you're like, well, wait a second. Is he going to make it or not? And then I go back, page 15, back to the hospital again. And then from there I go this. And so showing how to do this thing and balancing, finding ways to not tell the whole story at once, but divide it up in different parts so it comes back to it, connecting things so they're constantly thinking about what's next, which is what happens why you want to flip the pages more. The other
Yeah.
thing is just the layout of the page. Where on the page does it end? Does it end at the very bottom right corner of the page, or does it end in the middle of the page? Because that can cause the author or the reader to look at it differently. So that for me really changed. So when she completely reorganized the book, didn't add anything, took out a lot more than I would have liked her to take out. But then when she put together, then I read it. I'm like, now this is an adventure. It's no longer just a book.
Yeah.
That was really impactful for me.
And what's next for your writing, Zachary?
So it's a great question. You know, I really want to write a lot of books. The problem is with ChatGPT now, it's almost so crowded in the space, and I love ChatGPT so much. I mean, it's part of me. It knows me. I don't know how that will affect my next book, or if I will write a next book, but I think there's probably a good hybrid between the two. What I would like to do is focus on about 8 or 9 different historical events and then tie them into the warrior traits. So, for example, one of those events could be Hannibal crossing the Alps with war elephants over the Swiss Alps to get into Italy to attack the Romans during the Punic War. One of the stories, and talking about his resilience and talking about his confidence when his other general said, "You're crazy, you can't do that, you'll never win." He looked at him and he said, "I will find a way, or I will make a way." I mean, wow, such rich words that reverberate to this day, which is so similar to my philosophy in business, which is if you can't find a way, that's fine, make it. There was no plan to make glow-in-the-dark fire stuff. There was nobody that was doing glow-in-the-dark exit signs. I figured it out. I went to the Underwriter Laboratories. I went to the NFPA and the code people. I helped figure out how to change the code so I could do that. That's a great similarity there. And then, you know, stories like Lee and Longstreet during the right before the Battle of Gettysburg and the Pickett's Charge and the controversy that happened there and what we can undo from that. So I'd like to try to highlight a handful of these really great, make it a historical book with a narrative after each section there, tying that narrative to the things that we can learn in the real world.
And speaking of what people can learn and take away, how would you put the lessons to somebody who's not sure if this book is for them? Maybe because they don't think of themselves in any way connected to the warrior mentality or the warrior enterprise, whatever it may be of the warrior mindset. What would you say to somebody who, I think it's applicable to everyone in some way, shape, or form, regardless of age? There's a way to draw lessons away from it. How would you put that to somebody who wasn't sure if the book was quite for them, the lesson that you would want them to take away?
The same way that stay-at-home mom or that dad that lives a boring life goes to the movie theater and sees Mission Impossible or Star Wars or Thriller or one of these great things. It's a chance for them to escape and to put themselves in that protagonist's shoes. You don't need to read this book to become an entrepreneur or even to become a warrior, but to be entertained by them, to be inspired by them, to learn something by them. And that's, you know, why I think the Harry Potter series are some of the most brilliant books ever written, because as an adult, when you read those books, it's very, very deep and meaningful. As a child that reads those books, it's fantasy, and they get a completely different perspective. And then there's a real magic that happens when the parent reads the Harry Potter books to their kids and the connection that they have. So it's the same book with 3 completely different experiences that come out of that series there that is so incredible. And the other ones that do an amazing job with that is Disney, you know, where they're able to bring at that nostalgia to put you back to that childhood time, to give that childhood that fantasy, and then give you the opportunity to all share in that together. That's kind of my goal with this book, is to somebody that is a warrior, it allows someone to get a little peek into their soul.
Yeah.
Somebody that's struggling, that doesn't think they are a warrior, but they really are. Like, for example, that stay-at-home, that mom that's working 3 jobs because her husband left and she can barely get enough money to get food on the table, and she's just out there hustling, and she's embarrassed to tell people that. And then she reads this book and realizes, you know what, I shouldn't be embarrassed. I'm a badass, you know what, because look what I did, just like these other warriors did.
Yeah. Zachary, I mean, you've mentioned a few, but what books have inspired you the most? What stands out for you? We're covering your book. If I brought you back to talk about
literally
a
on my
book that
table
stands
right
out.
over here.
Okay.
I mean, when it comes to fun reading, I love the Tom Clancy's. I love the Jeff Shahara and the historical fiction stuff. I just love those books. But a book that has absolutely hit me like a ton of bricks and changed my life is this one right here.
Yeah, I got that right
Ryan
behind
Holiday.
me.
It's this whole concept of this new feeling that everyone's going into around stoicism. There you go.
Yeah.
And that then inspired me to get the original book, which is the unabridged, untranslated meditations from Marcus Aurelius.
I just got the one of the versions, one of the translations I just got a couple weeks ago. Yeah.
So those it's tough reading because it gets to all that stuff about the hardship and taking the hard route, but it's such validation to everything that I believe in and what I've been through. And, sometimes when you're going through that difficult part, just push on a little bit more because sometimes that's all you need just to get through it. A lot of people quit right before they're at that edge and they don't realize how close they were to making it through it.
In those moments, just another tangential question, but in those moments when you saw things were hard and you gritted down, you tapped into your resilience, what can you speak to about community, partnership, brotherhood, whatever it may be based on the environment that you were in, community? What can you speak to about tapping into that community to move forward? Because I think I just spoken about this last week where it's like so many of us do something for ourselves or because of somebody else, of what they need, but very rarely with other people. I think we're so hard pressed in our minds. Our perception is that if we can't do it alone, that it's not worth it or we're not doing it as well as other people. But can you tap into just what that means to tap into community to move forward? So
one of the reasons we have such an epidemic problem in the veteran space was suicide, and everyone says it's 22 a day. It's not 22 a day. It's closer to like 40 or 50 a day. Is the first things we lose our tribe. And that tribe, which, again, sometimes looks like the bar scene from Star Wars. You got some Mexican kid from New Mexico. You've got some gangbanger from Philadelphia. You got some hillbilly from West Virginia. And then you've got some yuppie from Chicago. And we're all in the same room. We're all drinking. We're all listening to different music. And it's beautiful. We all get along great. So that's that first thing, is the importance of the tribe. And when you get out, you start to self-isolate. And when you start to self-isolate, that eventually loses sense of purpose and then eventually causes you to make that horrible decision in that abyss, to kill yourself and not get out of the abyss. So the tribe is very important. But the single most important decision you will make in your life, without question, is who you choose to marry. It's the most important decision of your life. And you better make it a good one. The Spartans are known for their women, because the Spartan women basically, as they left them to go off to battle, they would say either come back with your shield or on your shield. Yeah. But don't come back if you lost and you're alive, right? They encourage them. For me, the darkest moments that I've had, my wife was always the one that was there to help me out. Now, look, she's a warrior herself. She's a tough cookie. She's a physician. She's uber brilliant. She rides me like you wouldn't believe, but man, she gives me the grace that I need and the support that I need when I need it, and to be out there. And I know I couldn't do this without her. The other thing is just friendship, and then finally, solitude. I think there's some real benefits in solitude. About 10, 15 years ago, my wife and I made a decision that we're each going to go on a vacation by ourselves once a year, without the kids, without each other. We're together all the time. You don't have to spend every second together. So for me, it usually involves going out in the mountains and just walking. For her, she pretty much only goes to Paris because she just loves Paris and eats all the great foods and pastries and stuff. But it's a time for us to kind of have that solitude, reset, find out what's important, and again, make the trip 100% about you, and rather than about what the kid wants to do and they want to do and everything else.
Amazing. Zachary, wrapping up, is there anything else you want to share about what you're up to these days? Anything you have coming up? Anything I didn't ask? Anything at all? The floor is yours.
No, I appreciate it. I mean, my real focus right now is getting out there and sharing my story and public speaking. My website's the best way to get a hold of me. It's real easy. It's just my name, ZacharyLGreen.com, ZacharyLgreen.com. And on there you can find information on how to book me. There's information on my book. I do workshops. I do keynotes. I do, one of my favorite things to do is take people to places like Gettysburg or Normandy or Belleau Woods and do multi-day immersion experiences at those specific battlefields. But that, and I'm very active on LinkedIn. I don't get a chance to check my LinkedIn messages as much as I should, but LinkedIn is an area that I spend a lot of time on also.
Zachary, thank you so much for sitting down with me.
John, thank you. This has been a really great conversation.
Absolutely, I agree. Thank you. And again, we covered Zachary's book, Warrior Entrepreneur, Lessons from the Battlefield to the Boardroom. If there's anything that I might have missed, we're limited on time, anything that I should reach out to Zachary on in terms of getting wisdom back, insights, knowledge, anything at all, anything I might have left out, please let me know. I'll reach out to him. In the meantime, thank you for watching. Thank you for listening, and I'll talk to you soon. Take care. Bye.
Thank you.